So, guys, we're going to talk about a travesty, the violence on law enforcement officers, and how we came about collecting this data, working with the Blue Alert grant from the Department of Justice. And Tim, I'd like you to just walk us through a little bit of this process of receiving a grant, what we did to get it, and what it's telling us.
Sure. Well, our work actually does predate the grant that we received. In 2015, we were witnessing something new in law enforcement, a trend where officers were being targeted, and they were being targeted because their assailants did not like law enforcement, had espoused political or social views that were against law enforcement. So we began to develop legislation that eventually turned into the Protect and Serve Act that would make targeting law enforcement officers a federal crime, a federal offense in certain jurisdictions. In order to make the case on the Hill and with the administration, we began to collect data on officers who were shot but not killed. It was, very much a in-house operation. We collected data through the end of 2016. In 2016, there was an enormous spike on officers shot and killed by ambush. 64 officers killed by gunfire in 2016, one of the highest numbers that we'd ever experienced. And a number of those were from ambushes. So we developed this legislation and basically began collecting this data as evidence to support it. We were the only game in town. We were the only ones who were collecting and tracking this information. Nobody else was doing it. So when we began to share that with the administration, with the Hill, the Blue Alert folks who work out of the COPS office, they were very intrigued, and they actually started to collect it themselves in 2018, and then came to the realization, hey, why don't we make this a grant and partner with the FOP? Because we're just copying and overlapping one another's work. So in the fall of 2019, we earned the grant, and as of that spring, we did the handoff, and we have been collecting it and sharing it on a regular basis since then.
Right, and prior to the grant, Mark, you played a big part in collecting this data. I want you to talk a little bit about what that data was when we initially started doing it, and what was the story it was telling us.
Prior to the grant, we were really just trying to track officers shot and killed, going off of news reports that we would find on Google or social media or whatnot. And the data that we were collecting was really basic: state, agency, number of officers shot and or killed. But post receiving the Blue Alert grant, we've been able to enhance our efforts, collect more data and more thorough data from a wider range of sources. Research tool that we use tracks or searches through over 300,000 news reporting agencies from all over the country, national, state, local. And we began looking more in depth as to time, type of incident, the status of the offender, whether they were captured or were able to get away. And it really led us to a rude awakening when we began to look at the data as to the number of officers that were found themselves in ambush style attacks. Prior to receiving the grant, we weren't really looking at that. We didn't know that it was really even possible to begin tracking that data. But whenever you see a story like that, it does catch your eye. But as we found, it happens more frequent than we would think.
It's interesting. The federal government through FBI index crimes. There's a lot of data that's collected in law enforcement, but it's surprising, even in law enforcement officers' deaths. But it's surprising to know that there never really was a source to go to determine just how many attempts were made. We know how many law enforcement officers were killed. What we don't know is how many times they tried to kill law enforcement officers.
That too, but the one thing that we're unable to track is the number of officers that are shot at.
Right.
I think I can't recall the exact number of officers shot in Chicago last year, but I saw a report within the last month or so that said 70 or 73 officers were either shot at or shot. Yeah. So all of those instances we're not even being able to track.